Hello, thank you for tuning in to my conversation with Zevi Slavin. And he is the creator of the channel Seekers of Unity. He is a mystical, a mystic, a mystical scholar, philosopher, and you can check out his YouTube channel. He's got tons of amazing great stuff that goes beyond just reporting historically, but you could say you can feel into what he's doing as he's deepening the conversation. He's having the conversation of mysticism. He's deepening it in all of its relevance, and I really enjoyed this conversation. It'll be the first of many, I'm absolutely sure. We will be doing, myself, John Vervaeke, and Zev will be doing a three-way conversation for 3 sessions on, I believe, mysticism, reason, and the dialogical. And so we'll be going deep into Martin Buber's work and seeing how these come together and reveal the conversation in which that they're already implicitly intimate with each other in such a way that we can also simultaneously realize their deep unity and native ground to our being. So I hope you really enjoyed this conversation. We go a lot into language, and apparently I'm learning from him how deep Jewish mysticism has a very unique relationship with language, and it sounds like with sound as well, which is very intriguing to me and experientially true from what he says, that at least from my own personal experience with stuff that we do in circling and all of that. So also stay tuned. John Vervaeke and I will be doing a course in July. Stay tuned for dates. I'll announce that as soon as we have it. It'll be through the Circling Institute. We'll be hosting that event, and it'll all be online. It'll probably be a weekend. Also, other housekeeping, if you are interested in circling, the links for everything that we offer is below. We have the Art of Circling, which is the year-long program. That's open for registration. We have weekend courses. We have one coming up in a few weeks, and we have open events every Thursday. All of that you can find out through the links below. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one, I am taking clients right now, so email me. If you've been thinking about that, just email me and we can go over the details of all that. All right, thank you so much and enjoy. Word. There you go. So you were talking about how I was just telling you about how I kind of came to YouTube and all of that, and then you were talking about like there were some similarities there, and you started talking about where you grew up in.
Yeah, so there's like some real similarities and real differences, as with everything. But I was just saying, I grew up in Sydney, Australia, just near the beach. And I really got into philosophy, but I got into it on my own. I wasn't studying in university. I was actually studying like in religious institutions, but I really got interested in like continental philosophy and phenomenology and existentialism and idealism, and then Eastern philosophy and all that really fun stuff, which I'm sure like whoever's listening as well has like at least dipped their toes into and enjoyed. But there was like no one who I could talk with these things about. Like there was no one around me who was interested, which is what you were sharing as well. And I remember once it was so like out of a novel the way that it happened. I was like crossing the street, and like on the street light, like there was this like sign where it's like, oh, if you want to join us for a philosophy talk, come here, here's the address. It was like one of these meetup, one of these hangout things. But they'd actually go in and like put papers around, which was like so like prosaic and beautiful. And then I took the date, I took the number, I went to the place. It was like on top of like some bar, and it was like a bunch of, it was actually quite a diverse crowd. It was men, women, young, old, small group, maybe like 13 people. And but what they were doing was, and I think they were even doing, no, there was one group that was doing analytical philosophy and one group that was doing continental philosophy. And I knew that I didn't want to go hang out with the analytical philosophers because I thought that would be boring. I wanted to hang out with the continentals who care more about humans and living in life. So I go to the continentalists, but they had like picked up on some super obscure topic in like, I can't even remember what it was. It was so obscure and like so irrelevant to anything which I found meaningful or anything which energized me. And I was like, damn, like I finally, like by serendipitous chance, found like the 10 people in my entire city that might actually be interested in talking philosophy. And they're like not even interested in in talking about the relationship between philosophy and mysticism, which is really what gets me on. So that was like a real realization that like if you want community, sometimes you can't find community, you have to create community, which is why like I pulled out my camera. It was terrifying. Like it was really, I wanted to do it for like a year, maybe 2 years, but I was terrified to do it. But I pulled out my camera and I did like the most like unassuming thing, which is just to begin with like a book review, choosing a book that I knew would like begin to set. I chose William Stace's like Mysticism and Philosophy. Like it really just had it all there in the title. And then as soon as I put that out, like right away, like the comments, the feedback, the connections, the relationships, the interactions, and from there it just really snowballed, and I was really able to not find the community that I was looking for, but to create that community. And now, like having the capacity, thanks to you and others, to like for those communities to link up, for the circles that I've been building to link up with what you're doing in circling and with what John is doing with his dialogos. And it just, I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity. And there's a sense where, I know this is a bit of a long monologue, so I apologize, but there's a sense where, Plotinus speaks about the journey of the alone to the alone. And most people take it in a way that's like some sort of like ideal depiction of the journey of the mystic, but it's actually also something very real and like painful and lonely in that description. Like if you're going to do this, it's going to be a journey of the alone to the alone, and having a community of people who are alone together in that makes it still a little bit less lonely, which doesn't mean that fundamentally the work has to be done on one's own, but we can do that on our own in community. There's common unity around that. So that's my little comparison or parallel to your story that you just shared.
It's almost like we can share in a communion and aloneness, right? In a certain sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about. It is really because in some level there is a way in which, I mean, it seems to me that a lot, and this is for, I mean, a lot of people who are like the continental philosophers, mystics, they do seem to be people who, for whatever reason, the most obscure thing or the thing that's hardest to see is what's most prominent to them or the most attractive to you, right? So there is this quality of, right, it's like this, it's like I can love you with all my heart, I can write it to you, I can sing it to you, I can stand on like through like my two toes and like do a song and dance, I can put it on your skin, but the one thing I can't give you is the experience of being loved by me, right? And there's something about that I think that speaks to, that I just heard, that I never quite heard it in this context before, which is that there is this way where, like I would imagine a mystical, like a mystic or somebody oriented in that level, there's this experience of wanting to get close to whatever that is, right? And that's something that I don't think that anyone, yeah, I guess in that sense there is an aloneness, because no one can really grant my desiring that or my wanting to get close to that.
Mm.
It's like a I never quite saw quite like this. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but this there is a it seems like that there's a deep, 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 deep freedom, right, in opening to what is not immediately apparent but most determinate, let's say, right?
Yeah, I want you to continue talking because I'm beginning to hear what you're saying, but carry on a little, and I think I have something to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like just it's so interesting because I thought about this sense of this. Well, what I heard you say was, yeah, I just ventured. It was vulnerable, but I just put something out there, right? And it was from your heart, and it was what you were interested in, and it was risky. I mean, just that's even possible right now is an interesting thing that I want to put off to the side and pick back up and what you think about all of that, right? However, basically you're just sharing something that was really important to you, that like you that was an interest that you had that no one else around you was talking about, right? um, which I would imagine on some level that interest spoke to what in some way what is most real to you, right?
Mm.
uh, and yet there is an aloneness in that encounter, right? But yet then if I take it, but then when you talked about it, that when you shared it, then the
Mm.
others started to come, right? And then there's this communion that started to happen out of that act of sovereignty, if you will. And
Mm.
so I was just thinking about like, oh yeah, and there's a way in which that aloneness, the aloneness of that encounter, or maybe the freedom of that encounter, or the particularity of that encounter, um, when shared, somehow leads to communion. But that aloneness, something is preserved in that aloneness all the way through.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think that's how I would.
Yeah. I love these conversations where language just barely like reaches its like little fingers onto where it needs to go to like to share a thought.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful to participate in this. I think to maybe to find some language for this, we can lean back into the continental tradition, which I think is, I mean, deeply mystical, both conceptually and historically. Like the influence is was well known by by historians of intellectual history. If you take someone like Immanuel Kant, so he has his. I'm only bringing this up not to be pretentious. I'm only bringing this up because you had brought up Heidegger before we began recording.
Yeah.
So this is
Oh,
in
yeah,
continuation to
yeah.
earlier. I don't be like, who's this guy that like begins on Kant
The
like
more
5 minutes
obscure, the
ago?
better, right? For sure.
Okay, good. So Kant has this idea of the Ding an sich, the thing in itself, which is fundamentally inaccessible. And all we can kind of do is we can triangulate around it and situate it, but never actually get to it. And we can, the very best we can do is come to recognize our own internal conceptual sort of lenses that constrain our reality and don't and never allow us to see beyond it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of echoes of this in the Heideggerian project. That notion of the fundamentally inaccessible, and Kant does this for like strange historical and philosophical and theological reasons. Largely, I mean, historians say that largely he was trying to make theology sort of inassailable towards the attacks of modernity, and by calling the thing in itself the absolute, the God, that thing which can never be known, it can also be never disputed or disproven. And so theology became sort of the Wittgensteinian unspeakable thing.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of difficulty in Kantian scholarship of if we can't know about the thing in itself, how do we know there is a thing in itself, but without going down that rabbit hole. But yeah. I think that the mystics fundamentally disagree with Kant's, and I mean, I know people will disagree with me, but I'm happy to have disagreement. I think that the mystics, insofar as we can use that term to indicate some sort of philosophy across time and traditions, also a difficult statement to make. without trying to qualify too much, I think that the mystics fundamentally disagree with Kant's fundamental epistemological and metaphysical observation, in that they think that the absolute, the thing in itself, the Ding an sich, is experienceable in an unmediated, first-hand, direct way. And I think, and people that have had what's called a mystical experience or mystical awareness or mystical consciousness, I think they know this to be true. And it's the Ding an sich, which is both the real, which is out there in reality. It's both the metaphysically real, the ground of existence, the ground of being, to use Meister Eckhart's term, but it's also the real within, and those aren't two different things. It's the same real, and it's like a very basic observation of mysticism throughout the ages as well. And because that's experiential, because it's experienceable, but never communicable, I think that is what gives rise to this dynamic of these people that are united in community that are fundamentally alone. Because I can never share with you, as you said, my subjective experience of this trans-subjective object, which, I mean, objects is the wrong word, of this thing, to use Kant's term, this thing within and without. But we can all share that experience, and to loop a bit back to Wittgenstein has this notion that all of our languages, all of our words are like this concealed thing within the box that only we know. But when I know and you know that we're both sharing the same thing in the box, because of all of the things that it throws off, because of all the things that shine from it, we can then begin to appreciate that we do share this box, and that is the core of our being, which unites us while making us fundamentally fundamentally alienated and inalienable from each other. I don't know if I'm not sure if that clarified anything at all.
Yeah, well, I feel closer to something, right, as you're talking about it, which is well, I mean, one of them is just, so just I guess there's a question here for you. In some sense, an unanswerable question, right? But those are the good ones, I guess, right? I just heard in the way that you laid that out with Kant, I heard, right, you've done a lot of thinking about this, right, and brought your attention to this, and I think that goes right to, I mean, for me anyways, one of the heart of the matter of this, really, these deeply paradoxical things that seem to be at the heart of at least our humanity, right? At least who we are, right? That have a quality of unsolvableness, yet says something in that unsolvableness, right? And very difficult to bring it into, especially in any technical language, right? Mm-hmm. However, there's this sense of, like, in you, I could hear it in you, there's something that cares to, that bothers to, that wants to, that speaks to. What is that in you?
Let me try to answer that both, like, biographically and then conceptually. Great. Because it's a beautiful question, because it's a question, I think, about beauty, which I think is where, like, I'm going to try and steer my answer. What happened historically, biologically, my own little, like, blimp of, on the scale of the universe. I grew up as we began speaking earlier, I grew up in a very Orthodox, Hasidic, very socially and politically conservative, very insular, religious Jewish community. Chabad Chassidus, for anyone that knows the particular streams within the Chassidic world. And a lot of the...
Where was that located? Where on earth?
So I grew up in Sydney, in Sydney, Australia. But the Chabad sort of dynasty emerges out of Russia, out of a town called Lubavitch. And then it migrated after the war to New York. My dad grew up in New York, and he was sent by the Rebbe, by the leader of the Chabad movement, to Sydney as an emissary with my mother. Right. So I grew up in Sydney, and the Chabad community is known, and I think you'll find this interesting. The Chabad community is known for being, out of all of the Hasidic communities, and Hasidism, for those that don't know, is basically the most successful branch of a form of Jewish mysticism that ever was. That's the first mass movement of Jewish mysticism that sprung up in the 1800s and continues strong till today, which dominates a very large proportion of the Orthodox Jewish world. Within the Hasidic world, there isn't really much systematic thinking, philosophy, theology, theosophy in most of the schools. It's done very poetically and homiletically, and sort of this free running, free association exegesis. It's very classic of Jewish classic literature. There's one branch which differentiates itself, which is the branch which I grew up in, which is the Chabad tradition, which predicates itself on trying to think clearly, logically, systematically, foundationally, definitionally about its own philosophy, which I know you find interesting. And as a consequence, the philosophy which it develops is very rigorous but very difficult, and it takes a lot of foreknowledge to begin to even understand what at all is going on, both from within the tradition and outside of the tradition. But within the Hasidic world, at least in my community, the custom was we begin studying Chassidut at the age of 13. So you can imagine sitting down with 13-year-olds to read something that's the equivalent of Heidegger's Being on Time or Hegel's, Phenomenology of the Spirit is not going to be a walk in the park. Yeah. And you're kind of just absorbing these terms. You have no idea what is going on. I feel, for anyone that knows the experience, this will resonate. It feels like you're studying some sort of celestial cosmic plumbing system of like how one thing next to the other one and how the light from one goes into the vessel of the other, and it's sort of, it's very, but there's no, in terms of actually being relatable and understandable and applicable, that's inaccessible entirely. What happened to me was when I was like 16 or 17, through a very roundabout way, I discovered the tradition of Christian mysticism, which to me was mind-blowing, because like I didn't even, at the time, my education was so sort of parochial and so closed that I didn't even know that there were other forms of Jewish mysticism, let alone forms of mysticism that weren't Jewish. It was like a complete revelation to me. But discovering other forms of mysticism allowed me to begin to understand my own categories in new ways, because I could now situate them in a comparative context. And when you compare things, the beauty of that exercise is you're able to strip away the particularity, which is important. You're able to bracket the particularity and see the universality of what connects them, right? So if a Christian mystic is having a vision of the Mother Mary and a Jewish mystic is having a vision of the Shekhinah, let's say, you can begin to say, oh wait, so clearly there's something more fundamental. I mean, this is an argument that I'd like to make and defend, that there's something more fundamental that's going on, that's connecting both of them. There's some sort of archetype that they're both tapping into. And when you begin to do that with the metaphysics of these traditions, they begin to make a lot more sense. The one motif which really, really caught my attention and really shone out to me, which is, a term which the phenomenologists like, that vision happens because the thing shines to us, was the notion of death and rebirth. Death, rebirth, resurrection, that the need for the ego to die, for us to come into our true selves, for the true ego, the true self to be rediscovered. And that notion was something which I had learned about for years in my tradition. We talk about Bitul Hayesh, Bitul Metzias. There's like, I could have told you before I made this discovery of sort of the universality of this. I could have told you like all the internal complexities and all the different levels and all the different mechanics, but I didn't know what they meant to me as a human in 2021. But through discovering that in Islam, you have an idea of fana, and you have the different sort of nafs that you have to go through. And in Christianity, you have their own crucifixion, which leads to a spiritual resurrection. And then you have forms in the East where you go through your own personal death, which leads to a nirvana. These are all being able to see, and then eventually going to the scholarship and reading someone like Mircea Eliade, who studies this across all indigenous traditions, together with Jung at the Uranus conferences. That was the first idea which really fell so heavily into my lap, because it's an idea which carries so much poetic and so much thematic and so much creative and imaginative force to it, which is why it appears like in all forms of literature and mythology and film even. So that was really the first thing that really caught my attention. That there was a fundamental psychological truth that rang true historically and rang true metaphysically and was meaningful to me. That was like the first thing which really like knocked my socks off. That theme of sort of this death, rebirth, apotheosis, even that this deification after we die.
Yeah.
And then you start seeing it in all philosophers and all the ancients and all the moderns, where it's like the need to die before we die. The life is about living towards death, or life is about learning how to die. I mean, these quotes are copious.
Yeah. Did you have?
So that's
Was there a moment? Was there like a moment where that hit you, or was it like a gradual coming to realize it? Was it like a moment where you read something or you had an experience, or like what was the experience of? Because I think what shines to me about what you're saying is this deep, well, one is this deep sense of familiarity with what you're talking about, of like where you, I guess it's like you get a glimpse of a deeper pattern, yet there's a way in which, but it's not just objective. It's not just like you, like it's not like a scientist observing the world. It's an insight that is simultaneously, it interrogates the phenomena, but the phenomena is so deep that you are part of that phenomena. You as well are interrogated in that experience, right? Just it can be really transformative.
Yeah, certainly. I think so. I think that's the case. I think when we realize, and this is what it was for me, when we realize an object, that a thing that contains within it immense beauty,
Yeah.
Immense goodness,
Yeah.
and immense truth.
Yeah.
That's resting, and I'll tell you about that moment as best as I can define it. But I want to first open up those terms a little. Beauty means not just like aesthetically pleasing or symmetry. There's this line from the poet Yeats. He says, "Truth is beauty, beauty is truth. This is all that you can. This is all that you can know, and all that you need to know." It's from his ode to a Grecan urn. That notion of beauty in the Greek sense, it's a beauty which rings true. It's a beauty which is authentic. It's beauty which is goodness and which is truth, right? And it's a goodness which is beautiful and true. It's a goodness which makes us want to be better and makes us want to be better to the people and the world around us. And it's a truth which is not a propositional or an analytical truth, although it can be, spelled out propositionally and can be analyzed. It's a truth which resonates. It's the reason I think why the Greeks have this tripart term, beauty, truth, goodness, is because they're not three different things. They're a triangle. They're really one thing. And that was what struck me. And also unpacking the actual beauty of it, the beauty of the symmetry of these traditions, of how they could be applied and could be predictive, and how they worked historically and phylogenetically and philologically. And so there's that beauty there. There's the goodness there in terms of the ethics which emerges from it, which I found incredibly compelling, and the truth as well, which is the analysis. That all follows from that experience. But I think the first experience was when I was reading this novel that had sort of deep themes of Christian mysticism running through it. I'm almost embarrassed to say the name of the novel because of how popular the novelist is for some of his other works. But I'll say it anyways because I owe a debt of gratitude to Dan Brown, and the book was The Lost Symbol. And in The Lost Symbol, he what he does essentially is he's unpacking. I know this because I went subsequently to listen to a lot of his interviews and look into him as a person. Dan Brown, it takes him about 8 years to write a book, because he has to first find something which he believes fundamentally before he can put it into novel form. So Dan Brown, I think, is not a novelist. He's a novelist of ideas, and ideas that he believes, that he's convinced by, that he finds persuasive. And in the book there, essentially what he's doing is he's giving a rereading of classic Christian mythos and theology through the lens of Christian mysticism, and he does it in a superb way. And as he was doing that to Christianity, and as he was doing that on page by page, and sort of doing that to each next core Christian idea, rereading them from this mystical, from this realistic, from this humanistic standpoint, the same pattern began to happen in Judaism. I'm like, oh, so, and even things that he hadn't pointed out explicitly, once he opened up the pattern to me, that pattern led to a cascade where everything that I was studying in my morning and evening classes of text that Dan Brown has never in his life seen and probably won't see unless he studies Yiddish and is interested in 17th century Hasidic literature, these things all began to turn for me. They began to turn from being closed, obscure, meaningless, chores, difficult, to being things that were life-giving, that were energized, that were beautiful, that were true, and that were good. And that kairos, that turning within the texts, within the ideas, was within my soul, because these were ideas which had sort of really saturated and which permeated my being. And which still do. And so that turning happened within me and the text, not as two separate things, but happened together.
Right. Wow. Yeah, just the way that you said that turning, when you said that turning, right? And I'm just appreciating, I think, that sense in which it evoked, you saw something, you heard something, like a tonos of some kind that's so deep, right? That revealed what was already always the case, right? Yet didn't occur as the case or something like that in its totality. But that particular sense of finding yourself, not like with like a new discovery, right, from some other world or something like that, but like something about where you are, right, and about where you've been and where all people have been, in this kind of deep sense of, in that rumbling through you, like where, yeah, that moment of where you see the thing and in transforming seeing the thing, you yourself are transformed in that, right? It's so personal.
Yeah, absolutely. I I think I think what you're saying is really true. And I think this is something which the mystics have to like constantly correct themselves when they speak, because they talk about the individual sort of becoming united or experiencing the one. And the mystics, when they're being more precise in the language, and you see Plotinus doing this over and over because he's a very precise thinker, and at least Porphyry, his writer, is that they say like you're not being united with the one, you're just like revealing what's already the case, right? There's a at most we can say that you're reuniting, and we can't even say that you're experiencing the one, because that presupposes a separation between you and the one, which there never was. And the sense of that what we discover is really ourselves,
Yeah.
And something that was never lost,
Yeah.
is a very difficult point for the mystic, because the mystic simultaneously wants to encourage transformation and discovery and unity, and yet they wouldn't be true to themselves if they said those things. So how does the project then is to encourage something which already is, like, it's a strange initiative to undertake.
Yeah. Well, and also even just the sense in which the discovery reveals this way in which you were already concerned about it, right? Like on some level, there's a quality of, like as if I've been looking for some sound. I talk about it like a sound, like it's like my whole life I've been hearing this sound, and I can't quite tell if it's something, if it's like way far away, or if it's like right behind my earlobe or something. But then there's the little moments where it shows itself, and you realize, oh, I have been listening to that sound my whole life, and I've been listening. And then I also hear that I haven't been hearing it, but the having been hearing it was concealed to me, was itself, I was still constituted by it. This is one of the things I really like about Heidegger, and how he talks about, at the ground of our being is care, right? These that we are the being, that in our being is already always a concern, a question. Being is a question for us. So there is this quality of these insights where one doesn't really discover something. It's like in discovering it, they reveal what they've already been inside of.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I, yeah, I love that metaphor of music that you brought up.
Yeah.
I think it's so apropos to what this is. I mean, the relationship between music and mysticism goes back at least to
Yeah.
like the Pythagoreans, but but that notion that there's sort of this lingering song, this forgotten song that we know that we don't know, an idea which is explicitly used by the Hasidic master Nachman of the what, Nachman of Breslov, um, who, sorry, Nachman of Breslov. That's embarrassing. Um, he he writes that that sort of there's this he first begins to try and move people, change people through teaching, through proposition, through logic, through wisdom even, through Torah, and he sees it doesn't work. So he then moves on to stories, and and stories. He really becomes really the only Hasidic author to write full-length stories, and it's a very bizarre anomaly in Hasidic literature. Complex stories with bizarre characters and plots, and they're all supposed to sort of awaken this enlightening and awakening experience, supposed to lead someone in that direction. And then the very final story that he writes is about this individual who's trying to find the song and he can't find the song. And sort of this is the transition from teaching to story to song. And it's the song which is ultimately the most powerful. This idea of which the Greeks have, that the song is actually the sound of the cosmos as it rotates. It's the song of the symphony of the cosmos, which
so good.
we hear for sounds of. Yeah. So
Yeah.
all the way from Greece to Nachman Breslov is that, and the beauty of music, the tonality is that the idea of resonance, right? This is a physical thing that if you strike a tuning fork and there's another one that's resonant next to it, it will begin to vibrate and to share that same song. And I think that's what discovering these truths are like. And I think I want to maybe add one thing here, which is that I think that there is, as much as it is a self-discovery, and it's a coming back to being and coming back to that care at the core of being, I think that there is a transformation, and I think that there is a vibration, to use this tonal metaphor that you're using. There's a vibration that's going on in this one tuning fork, which is alive and which is buzzing with that. It's the mystic who's alive. It's the poem. It's the song. It's the film. It's the text. It's the moment. It's the sunset that's shining with it, the light of setting suns of Wordsworth. And then we are that same tuning fork, but sometimes we're not vibrating. We're like just dormant and dead, and we feel heavy and we feel like we don't care. There's an anhedonia. There's this deep malaise. There's a deep depression and nihilism. And I think that's a very common experience. Right. But what happens is when those things are put next to one another, and there's an openness for the transference to take place, there's a transformation from death to life. And that's kind of what I experienced, that the ideas that were dead to me became alive, and that the moments and the part of me which is so deeply tied into that which was dead as well, and the way which I went living because of that became alive as well. And I think that's not to say that once you become alive that you're immortal and that you never die again. I think that we're always dying and being reborn. We're always losing our resonance. We need to go back to the source to be relit, to be re-struck, to be re-resonated. Right. But I think that is something that does change for the individual.
Right, totally. And so when you were basically 13, this is when come to you.
No, so when I was 13 was when I was first began to study these texts, in a way that was very dead to me. It's actually interesting now, because it occurred to me that the one of the names of these texts is Divrei Elokim Chaim, is the words of the living God. They're called the living waters, is how they're called. So the words themselves were alive and were resonating at that frequency, but I wasn't, and it took me probably 3-4 years until, and I actually think that period of time where I was able to receive these words that were dead to me was something which was serendipitous, because if I didn't have that, then I wouldn't have the ability for them to turn on me, and for them to, do you know what I mean? I think sometimes there's inspiration without content, which can be lost. It can just be it can just be like blown into the wind. And because I had all of that dead weight on me, there was something which was able to shift. And I think about that often.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're underlining or circling around something for me that is that I've been thinking about for a while. That's hard to put into words. But I think that that sense in which, and it's so interesting because I think our time right now, um, in the age of technicity, right? We have such a technical understanding of things just in terms of their usefulness, right? Or seeing everything as a resource or um, something we can categorize or calculate, but it's essentially about utilization, instrumental rationality, all of that, right? Which is like, I think, and there's nothing wrong with those things in themselves, but I think I know Heidegger and others' insight about that when that in some ways become our understanding of being itself, right, is as a resource, right, or something like that. That's a whole other thing. And so one of the things I've noticed is, for me, there's been so much in it. I think this is what I'm hearing for you too. It kind of hanging out with the text, for example, that's so obscure, right? That you can't even get a hold of what the hell it's talking about and like why you're reading it and why this matters. Yet there's something about hanging out with something that's not immediately intelligible for you, right? And like a certain kind of discipline in sticking with something like that, right? That's what I hear from my own experience in listening to you is that sense of like, oh, so this is why these guys, like these old fogies, like wrote this stuff down and right, like you had to go over this. They aren't just like kind of these dry arid you know old people torturing us. No, there's a whole world there. But that ability, this is one of the things that I think that's really um, getting less and less and less, is this sense of, I don't know what it is, but this hanging out with something that isn't immediately useful, right? That even it not being grasped ends up being important, right? Even it's beyond your understanding, its opaqueness is part of the process of coming into relationship with it. I mean, that has been, I mean, the things that I most love in my life are a function of that, right? So I can appreciate just that you've been thinking about that, because there is something really to that, I think.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great way to frame it. I appreciate that. I appreciate you bringing that up for me. I think what's interesting as well is that within the Jewish mystical tradition, the relationship with text and with language is quite unique,
Yeah.
in that it's not seen, as in many other traditions, as the inherent enemy to the good and the mystical, but it's seen as fundamental in the most fundamental way, according to Jewish mysticism and according to early, even classic, Jewish thought. The world is a text because the world is created through letters, through speech. The text of the Torah is the blueprint, is the foundation, is the mirror of the world. The world is a text itself. And if there's any text which is difficult and inscrutable and opaque and beautiful and painful and charming and enduring and puzzling, it's the world itself. And the hermeneutical project of being, which is the Heideggerian project, which is the project of mystic, is to hang out with that thing and to not let it go, and as well to not. I love that idea that it's that which cannot be instrumentalized. It's that which cannot be turned into a means for an end. And what we do with the world to our own detriment is that we turn it into an instrument. We just see the world simply as resources for our own expansion, for our own profit, for our own capital gain, which is so ludicrous. I mean, it's like it would be like taking like the most amazing work of poetry, taking like, you know, Dante's Inferno and throwing it into a fire, into a inferno to warm us up for 2 minutes. That's a parallel here. Instead of like spending a lifetime with the world as a text and trying to get into it. But I think that there are, which is why, incidentally, there's a Mishneh text which teaches that one has to study Torah, which is sort of the archetypal text in Judaism, not 100 times, but 101 times. And 101 is quantitatively different than 100 times. And there's an idea of going over again. And 101 essentially means that it doesn't end. That every time that you go over the text, it's the Aramaic is hafachva hafachva de kolebe, Hebrew actually. That you keep turning it because it's all within it. And I think that within moments, maybe a final thought to throw the ball back to you. I think that there are moments within life which we know, which I think is very accessible to humans, which is a blessing. Moments which cannot be confused and instrumentalized, moments which cannot be confused as means, but are so salient and so real and so arresting and so beautiful and good and true that we know them to be ends in themselves. Yeah. And I think a great example of this is in love. When we hold a lover in deep emotional, physical, spiritual intimacy and embrace, we know that we're not doing that to gain anything from it. There's the rest of the world can fall away, and we will stay here in this moment for eternity, and that will be fine. When a parent holds a child and the love, the bond between them, and many other instances which are accessible. You don't have to meditate for 15 years to get to that space. We know that there is something which is fundamentally an ends in itself, which is a means which cannot be turned into techne.
Yeah. That so I just had this sense of like, yeah, it's interesting because you could almost, you know, I want to hear a little bit more about this relationship between Jewish mysticism and language, and because I had heard something that there was this struck me, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about this. But it sounds like an example of a particular, what's maybe unique to what Jewish mysticism emphasizes, which it has to do with language and the relationship to word. And I had heard that there was a mystic who part of his practice was just simply the chanting of each letter of the alphabet, right, in and of itself. And I was like, wow, I don't quite exactly know what he's getting at, but I can feel the deep comportment to language, and even just the physical sounding of the vibration and its meaningfulness seem to be very, very wedded together. But I would say that it's interesting. I just had this thought about like, oh yeah, like the world is a text, and yet what we call reading now is like trying to read the text by like measuring the shapes of the letters or something, or categorizing them, or which isn't reading at all, right? But this starts to get at, see, this is one of the things about this for me, and I feel kind of an oomph about this. Like I want people to get a sense of that, what the mystics and the philosophers and the people who have, right, are talking about inhabited these domains, right, that they're really getting at that what's most near to every single human being. It's like it's the most practical, you know, it's the issues of just the facticity of our own being here itself, right, is really what we're talking about. It's not like some abstract way out there thing. It's it's the matter, literally, of our own lives, right? So like kind of understanding this and talking about the things that you talk about on your channel, and it's that's the thing about it is it's not abstract or out there in my experience. It's actually the most in here. It's the most close. It's the most daily, the most, right, the most pertinent to our own concerns. Such that when you shift and under like that, well, one is just to kind of realize that we live in our understandings, right? Like, as like historically, you just look at history, as people understood time differently, right? They lived in that under the way they lived was different. How they understood language differently, like showed how they comported their world and built their buildings, right? So this quality of that, when we start to have a engage in the eternal conversation, if you will, right, the very having of that conversation will have one converse differently, right, in all that you do. And that's the thing. I just feel I want to I want I want to light that up for people, because that's been so true for me, right?
Mhm.
And I get this sense that people really don't understand that, or when they think about philosophy, or they think about these these like mysticism, they think about it as some kind of like dry or abstract
Mhm.
or heady thing that's not pertinent
Yeah,
to them.
yeah, yeah. Wow, Guy, you said so much there. Like it's gonna there's a lot to be responsive to in that. Um, but I think they're all deeply connected. Let's try to open up those three things here.
Yeah.
One is the question of language and mysticism, the relationship to the alphabet. The other is the salience of these questions for ordinary people, and the third one is how these questions and ways of thinking being are put into all that we do. It's not just some abstract, dry, sort of distant thing. I think so much of my project that I'm engaged in, and saying I don't mean that to say that collect like individually as me, Zevi Slavin. I mean my as in this larger thing that I'm partaking in, is to change the perception on the final 2 points. Is to show why mysticism is not some arcane, obscure thing that belongs in dictionaries and in museums, but that mysticism is precisely the not only the truth, not only the truth or a truth, the facticity which always has been, but one which is more relevant now than ever before. And I hope I can do justice to that both now and in the broad scope of my project. And I want to correct something which I said earlier, which is I said that while I was in Sydney, I found no one that was interested in talking about philosophical mysticism, and that's only because I was talking about it wrong. Had I gone to people and said, "Are you interested in meaning? Are you interested in connection? Are you interested in intimacy? Are you interested in vulnerability? Are you interested in being happy and whole and fulfilled?" They would have all said yes. Are you concerned with the technologization of society? Are you concerned with the instrumentalization? Are you concerned with the way that machines are looking poised to take over everything and to leave us useless and meaningless? Then the answer would have been from 95% of people on the street, yes. And then the question is, once you've identified that, which John Vervaeke over at his project in the identifying the meaning crisis, then the question is, so how does mysticism come to answer those real questions? How can mysticism cultivate a authenticity of being, authenticity of relationship, a relationship to the self and to reality as a whole, a state of tranquility, a state of content, a sense of purposefulness and meaning as we move through and dance through life? That becomes the salient question. And I think if you read the literature from the turn of the century onwards in every field, and this is an audacious claim, but it's something which I've done a little of, and from my experience, it's always proven true. the burgeoning fields from the mid-century onward, I would say, actually more precisely, whether it's in science, and that could be in quantum science, that could be in grand theories, that could be in biology, in systems theories, in ecology, whether it's in the psychology, whether it's in, and that's in the humanist and the depth and the analytical, in any field that you choose across the board. When you read people at their deepest and at their greatest, and the field at its furthest in that regard, before we get into a collapse, which kind of seems to ruin everything, which we can speak about separately, which people probably know what we're referring to. They all sound, and even then, by the way, I would say this is even true for the people who bring about the collapse of science and humanity. They all sound like mystics. They all speak like mystics. And some of them more self-aware that they're doing so, whether that's Abraham Maslow speaking about self-transcendence, whether that's Niels Bohr or David Bohm speaking about the fundamental unity of all reality and the way that we participate in that and create that with our narratives and observation, whether that's a postmodernist like Derrida, Foucault talking about the fundamental emptiness of reality, which is pages straight out of Nagarjuna's Mahayana Buddhism, mysticism on the other side of the spectrum. All of contemporary human endeavor at its finest seems to be converging on the mystical, seems to be converging on the fundamental fact that there's a deep fundamental unity and participation that we have with reality. There's a deep and there's a deep meaningfulness to every single moment of existence, the all and the nothing, however that's going to be phrased. So I really do think that mysticism is not arcane, it's not obscure, it's not lost, it's not some old textbook stuff. I really do think it's the cutting edge of all of science, of all of humanities, and it's my hope and wish to explore that and open that and explicate that. And I know that's the work that this group that I've now stumbled upon is also engaged in. Wow. That's on sort of the topic number 2 and 3. I want to answer the question of question number 1, which is Jewish mysticism and language, but I'm getting a sense that I'm talking for too long in one shot.
This is great.
So I'll let you keep going. Okay, fine. Okay. So we're going to change gears now to talk about philosophy.
I'm just impressed that we have numbers on things.
I'm an itemized kind of guy.
Yeah, right on.
What I hope to say now, I hope to be demonstrative of a seemingly obscure point in linguistics metaphysics that's actually going to be super pertinent and relevant in ways that you yourself hinted to, which I don't know if you did this intentionally or unintentionally, but this is going to be, what I'm doing now is hopefully going to be both expository and performative in that regard. So I don't say this lightly, but Jewish mysticism seems to have something different in its relationship to language than all other forms of mysticism. And I don't say that lightly because I approach mysticism from a comparativist point of view, from a perennialist or neo-perennialist view, where I am looking for unity. I'm not looking for who's better and who's worse and right. who's father's the strongest. I'm looking for you. I want to discover the unity within and between traditions. So when I say that there's a real difference between traditions, I say that with the trepidation and respect and respect for the differentiations, and also that makes each tradition beautiful in its own regard, and not just become one big mush, the night in which all cows are black, according in Hegel's language. Yeah. Jewish mysticism. So let me first begin by talking about other forms of mysticism. In most forms of mysticism, you see this very heavily in the East, particularly in Neo-Vedanta and in Buddhist modernism, where Buddhism gets brought to the States. And you see this in classic texts as well. It's not just made up by Alan Watson and Aldous Huxley. And you see this in classic forms of Abrahamic mysticism and other forms of indigenous mysticism. That language, there are a few like common enemies, or like public enemy number 1. The ego is one of them. Language, words is another one. Because what words do? Words are the enemy of the mystic. They're the antithesis of the mystic, because the mystic is after quest of unity of all reality, unity with being, or a fundamental sort of obliteration of all being, to sort of the reduction that sort of Buddhism tends to in some of its thinkers. But both of those, which I think are two sides of the same coin, they cannot have they cannot have differentiation. They cannot have labels separating things, because the mystic looks at the tree and doesn't see branch and leaf and bud and fruit and root and bark as all fundamentally different, as atomistic separate entities. It sees one big organism which includes all of reality, including the tree. Alan Watts has a great line that humans are we are like how a planet peoples, like the apple tree gives to us apples, we come forth from the planet. There is no separation. And all the separations, all the dichotomies between good and evil, between up and down, between right and wrong, between true and false even sometimes, and that's tricky. All those dichotomies between body and soul, spirit and matter, the mystic, although maybe in some earlier iterations or conceptually early iterations, mysticism, they do hold on to those dichotomies and have sort of an axiology of valuing of one over the other. Eventually, and you see this in all mystics, they come to obliterate those categories, and they don't exist at the fundamental level of reality. God and world, all these things, it is the fundamental obliteration of all polarities, of all dichotomies. There's a lot more to say about this, but and because I'm trying to get to a point, I'm going to be saying a lot of things inaccurately. So if anyone wants to get into this further, like, don't take this as a final word, and I'm happy to engage further with it on these topics. The place for polarity in mysticism is rich, but for the sake of demonstration, for the sake of argumentation, the mystic has to do away with all those things. And part of doing away with all those things is doing away with words, because words is what we as humans use to differentiate. It's the construct which we come to say, here is A goes up until this point, and here is B, and B is new. It's the Aristotelian project of non-contradiction and the separated middle, which the mystic doesn't really care for. The mystic says, no, coincidentally oppositorum, A is B, B is A. Let's get, like, there is no A and there is no B. So language, words, labeling, differentiation, these are all things which are an anathema, the nightmare, the enemy of the mystic. Comes along Jewish mysticism and turns things on its head.
Yeah.
And it does this for probably less, although this is debatable, probably less phenomenological reasons and more for historical and textual reasons, that it's forced to make this move and then sees it phenomenologically. There's a lot of debate in mysticism which precedes which, phenomenology or text or phenomenology. Let's put that to aside. The Jewish mystic, and the best case example is the mystic who you refer to, most likely whose name was Abraham Abulafia. I did an hour class on him if anyone wants to get more information over at the channel. And Abulafia, working with earlier traditions, with Sefer Yetzirah, where the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are creative. They're creative, and they're not. We all think about language. All moderns think about language in a Saussurean way, right? The Saussure, who was who gave birth to semiotics and to linguistics as we know it today, gave us the idea, the notion that there's, and this is an idea which actually goes back to the Greeks as well, that language is arbitrary, right? I call this a cup, but I could call this a Fuji too, right? And that's it. There's nothing intrinsic about a cup that makes a cup a cup. Language itself is instrumental and non-essential, right? It's arbitrary. It's just the relationship between the signifier and the signified is the way that Saussure puts it, right? And we can signify things in all kinds of different ways. It's meaningless, and we're not even signifying the thing in itself. We're only signifying the concept of the thing, because the thing in itself is inaccessible. It doesn't really exist. Jewish mysticism fundamentally disagrees because of things that come right out of the Bible through the Mishnah and the Talmud, which says that God creates the world with speech, right? And this is what it says in Genesis. God says, "Let there be light." Yehi ar vayihi ar, and there was light. God says, "Let there be day," and there was day. So God speaks the world into existence. The logos, the speech of God, is what brings reality into existence. And the speech is not a Saussurean speech, which is just a signifying and signified. The speech becomes existence. So in Hebrew, a cup is a kos, chaf vav samach, and it's chaf vav samach because that is the fundamental DNA and structure of this thing, is chaf vav samach. It cannot be any other way. And if you change the letters, it would change into something else. And this is like getting into magic, but there is a tradition of what's called Kabbalah Maasid, of practical Kabbalah, where you actually mess with the letters of a thing and you change the thing itself in doing so. I've never seen this done. I can't do it myself, But it testifies to how deeply the Jewish mystics felt about the relationship between language and object. That they are each other. They're engloved in one another. It's the energy and the matter which are just different forms of one and the same. And therefore, the letters of the Hebrew language, which is the essential language for the Jewish mystics, as Arabic is for the Muslim mystics, is the divine language, is the building blocks, is the periodic chart of reality. And therefore, by saying Aleph, Base, Gimel, Daled, hey, we can connect to those energies of existence. And each one of them has a different texture, and the combinations between them, what Abulafia did, besides for just naming out each of the letters individually and getting into the deep topology of those letters, and why is the Aleph shaped like two yods with a vav between them? What does that mean, right? But when we begin to combine letters, right, I can take Abba, Asa, Aha, and I can begin to play with the texture of reality in that way. Now, to try and bring that up to speed to the 21st century for people that are just like, this is so meaningless and arcane and obscure, and linguistics has moved on, like, thank you very much. We all walk around in a world, right, which is fundamentally constitutive of, I mean, not at a subatomic level, but at the level that we observe it, made up of matter and things on this world. And then there are these like humans, which like kind of bring things into existence. And the most powerful things that exist in our world are not the material things. It's like a chair, a car, a mountain. These aren't the real things in existence. It's the beliefs, it's the constitutions, it's money, it's governments, it's companies. These are the things which govern. It's the relationships. These are all things which govern our life. And this is a Kierkegaardian point as well, that what we take to be the real is actually less salient than what we bring into existence. A point which is made very beautifully by Yuval Noah Harari in his thesis, Why Humans Dominated the Evolutionary Game, because we were able to communicate and build narratives and weave stories with our language. Language is creative. Language is the foundational building blocks of our reality as we live it.
Yeah.
And even now, when you look at a physical object, a physical object is made of words, is made of code. It was a machine which had instructions, that had the language, that printed this out. It can be so the relationship again between language and matter is once again being blown wide open, both in the way that the world is actually being built around us. I mean, I'm looking at Guy Sengstock. I'm looking at a combination of ones and zeros that are streaming through a computer, up through to a satellite, coming back down. It's language that's allowing me to see your face. And the word face that I have for you, if I had a deeper appreciation of that, if I was talking the Hebrew panim, I would know that face means both pnim, both the inside and face. That by seeing your face, I see your inside. I'm able to communicate with you. And by opening up the power of language. And this is the final point of this rant that you've allowed me to go on, and which I so appreciate. Thank you. How did this conversation begin? We were speaking about creating communities. What did I do? I sat down in front of my phone, which was created by Steve Jobs, using language to talk to his engineers, to inspire them to join in his vision of what he could do with these words, to share my words of what was exciting me about the words which I had read. And through that, I was able to create something, to bring something into imagination. And through the creative speech that we take and we choose to engage, we embody that power of the divine, of Logos, to speak creatively. And the power of words, as much as there's a power for creation, there's always a power for destruction. We can use words we can ruin a career with words. We can ruin a marriage, a relationship with a few words. So the constitutive power of words, of language, as fundamental to reality, is something which the mystics cherish and relish in, which is why they do not back down from the ineffability, but as Buber writes, they shake against the gates of ineffability to try and fling words into it so that some of its fire can seep out and some of the rattling of the gate can be heard in their own soul and in the people around them.
Yeah, totally. And this, what I'm hearing you say is this, well, a couple of things. So what I'm getting is this particular thing that you're talking about around with language and with words, right? There's something that the Jewish mysticism is got a grip on, right, has got an optimal grip on, if to use John's language, that highlights this, that points to this in a way that's like really unique to Jewish mysticism, and that you see that, and the what's given in that seeing, in that insight about language, right, affords essentially what I'm hearing you say, the whole universe, essentially, the
Yeah,
discloseness of, for anything that's anything at all, for it to be, right? That there's ways in which even the sound, and also what I'm hearing too is that the connection between the actual sounds of the syllables, the vibration of those, of the actual sound, is itself is says as well, right, all the way down.
yeah, yeah. I so this like really profound and fundamental insight of Jewish mysticism, which was also put into practice in very interesting ways, which is sort of, we can't divorce mystical experience and its theory and its practice. Those things go hand in hand. It's something which is so deep and so profound, and has been unpacked and explored for so many centuries, that I can only really give you in one rant, just sort of a scattering like of the some of the ideas which come out, but all of those elements within language that are explored, and there's so much to explore. As you said, like I didn't even mention the very power of, or the relationship between the vibration, the actual shape of the letter, both pictographically and in our, in linguistically, as it comes through the different parts of the mouth, the throat, the tongue, the lips, and the shape that it takes as it rolls off our tongue, and the relationship that has to the shape of reality, which harkens back to what we said earlier, that the music of reality is again built by this, the musicality of the language. Yeah, these are points which are all there. It's all like it's almost like such a large idea. It's hard to like pull adequately at any one string of it.
Right.
But suffice it to say that anything which is going to come up in your imagination, as a way to explore this, in all good probability, has been explored and has been discussed and has been put forth. It's just waiting to be rediscovered and waiting to be translated out, both linguistically and meaningfully.
Right. Totally. It's interesting because I mean, my under like the there's a professor in Italy who wrote, his name's Ivo Di Gennaro, and you could say he's a philosopher, he's a scholar, and he goes really deep in a very really like a very primordial sense and with language, which I've really appreciated his work, right? And one of the things he talks about is that is in some sense how deep translation is for us, right? And what it affords. And so, for example, he would say something like, in every moment, right, when we speak, I'm translating myself into the mother tongue, right? Like that. And it's so interesting to think about that like every time you speak, it's an issue of translation, right? This kind of sense of translating. And it's interesting to think about what happens when you need to start to translate into other mother tongues, right? Like that in doing that, and if you do it, and as he would talk about it, is that you got to really, it's not a matter of just finding a corollary word, because that isn't what's communicated in that language. There's a primordial experience, right?
Yes.
That's communicated. And what you want to do, a real translation, is one in which you listen into that primordial experience, and then you translate that into the English, right, into Hebrew. And it's going to be different, because the right the place upon which that language sprang forth, or was from, dwelling from the particular area that it's indigenous, right? So and he says, but in order to do that, right, from one mother tongue into another mother tongue, right, into your own mother tongue, right, is that in some sense you start to realize that you can start to hear the mother tongue of mother tongues. And that hearing reminds me of just what you talked about in the beginning. You start to hear these deeper, this thing that underlies all these mystical traditions. There's a unity, right? Something more primordial underneath it. And in the way he would say it is that mother tongue of mother tongue is the sound of being, right? In some sense. And I think it's no accident that, in the time, the the ontological, atom bomb that exploded in Greece, right, was at a time where trade is coming in, and they're starting to, these indigenous Greeks are starting to having to grapple with these other cultures, and these issues of translation, right, start to happen. And then this very insight that you were talking about in the beginning of our conversation is basically philosophy. It starts to become, as Parmenides would say, it started to become necessary to think being, right? Because to think about this is so striking to really consider this, right? About what happened with Heraclitus and the pre-Socratics is this that was so radical, right? This thinking of being, right? It's very difficult today to get at how radical that was, but it was so radical. In fact, it's that very, very early opening of thinking, right, and language, they're just like this, right, that everything that we dwell in, right, everything that we live in and take for granted, right, is a function of that. Started there. Right. There'd be no technology, there'd be no science, there'd be none of that kind of stuff until someone started to go, what is this thing underneath everything? And this is one of those, and I don't know exactly what we mean by where, because you do have this experience, and I'm hearing it in the way that you're talking about this with what Jewish mysticism is highlighting. I can hear you respond to something necessary there, right? And that's something about how it works, is that there are these things where it's like it becomes you can hear there's a necessity to think newly, to say something new, like there's this, and you can hear it and be in response to it, right? And that's where language starts to, I think new language starts to spring forth, if you will. Now that's a big mystery to me of like, how do we know that, right? Like but it's true. It's like there's these necessities that start to determine us, and that we are in response to, whether or not we know it or not, right? And you can see historically looking back, right, in some sense philosophy is a response in some sense to the previous ambiguities that were left open from the previous thinkers, right? And then that whether or not the thinkers actually knew that they were doing this or not. You could see them being in response to it. So there's some necessity going on there, right? It's deeply Western language, right? Which is absolutely compelling to me. And I hear that in your passion, actually, of your address.
Okay, that's yeah.
Great. This is I'm having a really good time. I really appreciate the conversation.
Me too.
Getting to you, and the three of us are gonna have a lot of fun. I can tell.
I feel like we're just getting started, and I don't mean that in senses of this conversation. I mean like in terms of like a lifetime. Like we're just getting started. And it's really exciting to be to have this opportunity. So thank you as well. You've opened up such like a beautiful and profound kind of worms. Let's see how we can okay. So the first thing in terms of that, we're always translating, and we're translating ourselves. We're translating being into language. Is something which you started by saying. I'm gonna try it to the best of my ability to move chronologically, if I can remember. We're also translating each other, right? There's this process that linguists talk to about code, that we code and decode. You have a thought in your head, which like has this kind of debated relationship between thought and language in the mind, and the process of priority there. That's something which I'm not clear in the literature, but I know there's a debate about it. But then somehow you encode that into language, into discrete, brackets of units made up by letters and words and sentences and paragraphs, and you convey that. So you yourself have encoded that, and then that comes to me. I mean, there's a lot more going on here, because that's going to your microphone, which, as we said before, is going through here. And I've been a fan for a while of Marshall McLuhan, who talks about the medium is the message. So the part that plays is not to be passed over lightly. That comes through to me, and then I hear those words, those letters and sentences, and I hear them linearly, and then I take them and I try and encode them to try and get. There's fundamentally, we're trying to do is this telepathy, where I'm trying to get the thought that you had into my head. That's what communication is, and this is like this is telepathy on steroids, because we're doing it, over different time zones and different continents and different backgrounds, and we're coming from different language in terms of mother language. Although we share English as a mother language, the way which you grew up, the way which I grew up, shapes our languages and our Englishes, where conceptually our worlds are fundamentally different, and always will be. So part of that process, I'm going to try not to do too much name dropping, but only the it's funny. I had this one comment on the conversation I had with John, where most of the comments were appreciative and thankful and grateful. There was one comment which was like, "Oh, it's just two guys trying to drop as many names as they can and quote as many books as they can." And I was like, "Wow, that was like," I was flattered by the comment because that's not at all what was trying to happen. So I'm intentionally now trying to actually do that less. And I appreciate, Guy, how much you speak straight from your being. That's something which I'm appreciating as well in this conversation. But but in exception to that, I do want the name and title of the book that you're talking about, translation. So Walter Benjamin, a German Jewish philosopher with a tragic ending, he writes this masterpiece of a book called The Art of the Translator, which becomes like a textbook for theory of translation ever since it's published. He has another unpublished work, which is like his magnum opus, which is a fascinating, like, mystical story in and of itself. So in The Art of the Translator, Benjamin says exactly what you've been saying now, which is that what is untranslatable. He talks about the attempt to translate poetry, and he says that we can do translation to some degree. The famous line that every translation is a betrayal, every translator is a transgressor. I think that's Benjamin's line. But he says that when it comes to poetry, precisely that which cannot be translated is the poetry. The
Yeah.
words can be translated, the verses, the poetry is precisely what cannot be translated. But I love this point that you brought of the mother tongue of the mother tongue,
Mm.
which is the poetry, which is the passion, the pathos, the which cannot be translated, right? This goes back to the beginning of our conversation. It's the thing in itself which cannot be communicated, which cannot be, but which does not need to be translated because that is the mother tongue. That passion, that care of being, that is which you could listen to a speech in Japanese and you'll get the point of it if there's enough being and care and pathos put into it, and so when you end by saying that what was salient was the passion in it, and the passion as well, which is what evoked by that experience, right? It's a passion in the thing, which ignites the self, which resonates and shakes with our own folk. So that's a point which very much landed heavily with me, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate how you began and ended with that, and this conversation is very beautifully self-referential like that. In terms of what happens in Greece, which I think was the other main cluster of what you were gesturing towards.
Yeah.
So there's this well-known theory from the German philosopher, again another German. They do a lot of good thinking, these Germans.
Yeah.
Karl Jasper. Karl Jasper gives us the theory of the axial age, which I'm sure your audience know well, which has been nuanced with later scholarship, but still holds very well even after it's been critiqued. Where not just in Greece, but sort of across the board, there's this 300 to 500 year period where things just fundamentally turn, and that's with the pre-Socratics, who are woefully underrepresented. There's great work by Pierre Hadot, and there's another work by this Jungian fellow, what's his name, something Siegel, doing great work on unpacking the pre-Socratics. I mean, and the pre-Socratics are the lifeblood of the deepest thinkers of the continental tradition. Heidegger is a great example, amongst others. So it's happening in the pre-Socratics. It's happening with Confucius in China. It's happening with the Buddha in India. It's happening with the prophets of ancient Israel in Israel. It's happening across the board. And you see some of the things in Native America and in indigenous traditions. There's a real moment, there's a real turning, a real kairos over there. And much of it has to do with language. The discovery of language, the formation of language is not incidental. It's not haphazard. It's not arbitrary, and it's not coincidental to this. These things are happening with each other because they are each other, which is what we're getting at here. Which is something which I myself as well don't have a full grasp on. So I want to explore this together with you, which is really exciting and fun.
Yeah.
But just one point before moving more directly to language, which I want to go back to dialoguing, because in my passion I can sometimes monologue too much, and I apologize if that happens. But in the discovery of being for the pre-Socratics and thinking being, which is a perpetuation and a continuation of what had already been going on earlier. I mean, for 2,000 years, we had Greco-Roman mysteries, Eleusis, Dionysus, and others, where we get the term mystic from. The mystic, the mystikoi, is the initiate of these mysteries, who on death cannot speak about what they saw, who anyways can't really speak about what they saw because it's ineffable. But all they can say is, we now know that the gods are real in some sense, and that we are immortal, like which is like it still rings pretty much true, like all the way up until 2021, which is fascinating in and of itself. And so there is a deep tradition of union, of mysticism, of the mystery, which then goes under some sort of transformation with thinking being, and not just experiencing being or being present to being. Right? There was a theophany. There was a showing of being. Is what they have in these sort of underground caverns, which gets continued in Mithraism. We're still finding those all over the place in Athens and in the excavations today. But what happens? This is a point which occurred to me now, because I do think that there's a identity in difference and a beauty in difference, to borrow from the postmodern thinkers. What happens in the axial moment in Jewish thinking at the time in correspondence to that Greek moment. And the same thing I think could be explored for other traditions, which I'm not expert enough to comment on, is that Judaism comes to its own realization of being, right? And the name for God in Judaism, there are many names throughout the Bible, but what seems to be the central name and the name which gets most picked up by the tradition of Jewish mysticism is the Tetragrammaton, is the literally unsayable name, right? The unspeakable. It's the Hebrew letters Yud, Hey, then Vav and Hey. And we don't even say those letters I broke up those letters if you notice. We don't even say the letters in continuation, because it's the words which were only spoken by the high priest in the depth of their mystical union. The holiest moment of the year on Yom Kippur, the holiest place in the world, which was in the holies of holies of the temple by the saintliest individual who was a high priest to the congregation of Israel. But what that word means, according to later Jewish linguistics and mysticism, is an amalgamation of three words. It's haya, all words which we can say luckily. Haya, haveh, v'yeh, which is, was, is, and will be. As one, simultaneously. The yud, the prefix before them, means that it's perpetual. It's perpetual wasness, isness, and will beness, right?
Yeah.
This is the Jewish word for being, which we cannot say. It's the being which collapses temporality of past, present, and future, because they're all happening simultaneously in this numinous fashion. And that is the God of the Bible. That is what appears to Moses at Mount Sinai and at the burning bush, that shines forth to him. It is the past, present, and future. It is being in its transcendence immanent, in its transcendent immanence. That's what this word is.
Static temporality, yeah.
And when we translate this word in King James and others into Lord with capital L, capital O, capital R-D, I mean, how much is lost in that translation? Tell me, like from
just hurt
right
soul. I went inside, yeah.
It's painful, but
right.
But what the Jewish prophets do with this, which I think is parallel to what the pre-Socratic philosophers do with when they discover being, is that the Jewish prophets are less interested in thinking being, but they're more interested in being. And what I mean by that is they understand that being is all there is, and we have to get into right reconciliation with being by enacting being, by participating in being, which I think demonstratively, if you want to know what a culture is most interested in the ancient and contemporary world, ask them what is their God and what is their apotheosis, right? God, according to Paul Tillich, is definitionally, according to Paul Tillich, the object of ultimate concern, right? So if money is what you're most interested in, then money is your God. And becoming who is the most respected person in a given society, in a civilization, whether it's the pharaoh or the emperor or the king or the celebrity or the sports play, whatever it is, that is the God, because that is the pinnacle, that is the apex, that is the capstone of your society. And the ancients had a notion of apotheosis, that the Caesar is God, right? Plato wanted the philosopher king to be the deified. The pharaoh is the God. This tradition of deification, of becoming God, becoming the object of ultimate concern and embodying that happens in the Bible and in Jewish mysticism by imitating God, by uniting with God in action. How? Not through power, not through might, not through military prowess, which is how pharaohs and emperors. For Plato, it's through wisdom, which is better than all those. That's how we become the apex of the republic, is through wisdom, through logos. In Judaism, the way that we become being is by caring for the beaten, for the downtrodden, for the lost, for the lonely, for the depressed, for the marginalized. V'halachta b'drachav, according to rabbinic literature, according to reading the Bible, is by imitating God. And the three acts which God does in the Bible: God visits the sick, clothes the naked, and buries the dead, right? He visits Abraham after he's circumcised while he's sick. He clothes Adam and Eve in the garden, and he buries Moses when there's no one else to bury him. Those are the three ultimate acts of kindness, because we're with someone in the most vulnerable moments, when they're sick, naked, or dead. And with the dead, they're never going to repay our favor. It's a kindness of truth. It's a chesed shel emet, says the rabbis, and it's by reaching the pinnacle of kindness, the pinnacle of love, to the hungry, to literally the hungry, literally the naked, literally the sick and the dying, and by setting that as the standard, everything else as well follows by extension. That is how we participate in being. And phenomenologically, and this will be the last point before I want to throw back to you, when we engage, we've done copious scientific, double-blind, quantitative experiments to prove this. When we engage in gratifying our own dopamine rewards systems and cycles, that does not lead to sustained happiness. That leads to very short-lived, short-fused happiness, which turns people into depressed, nihilistic, running away in basement kind of people. When we engage in kindness towards others, and the more altruistic, the more true it is. When we spend money not on ourselves, on others, when we spend time volunteering for others that can never repay us, that is when we're most happy, most fulfilled, most in sync, most in flow, most being, according to Jewish mysticism.
Wow. So interesting. As you're talking about this, I'm getting into some interesting visuals, and there's a sense in which I'm hearing the inner kind of the wellspring of like a sense of intelligibility that feels like it's sounding out the outlines of being, right? Of dwelling, right? It's like it's that sense of just sitting with something and sounding it out, or something like that, right? I get that sense of it right here. But unfortunately, I have to go. I just realized I'm 5 minutes late to something. So I will have to use my speech to officially complete the first of our conversations, I'm sure. So good to meet you, my friend.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, I look forward to more of this. And everyone stay tuned to, we'll be hanging out with John Vervaeke and the three of us talking about all this stuff.
Are you joining in 2 hours for Zoom with John and I? Is that what's happening?
No.
No?
No.
Wow. Okay. I really have to figure out what's going on then. Guy, it's been so much fun to sound out being with you and to participate in this dialogue, yes, grasping at the ingraspable. And what I really hope is to be able to one day sit down in the flesh, the corpus. I'm a big fan of bodies, of
me too,
of material.
Yeah,
as much as mystics are. I want to hug you, I want to hold you and feel you. So God willing, we'll have that chance one day.
Absolutely, my friend. All right. Yeah, just do me a favor. I can. If there's any links or anything you want me to put in the show notes, I'll link it to your channel.
Yeah, that's pretty much all that's necessary.
Okay. All right, my friend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.